Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Bean, and I'm joined by Chris Kent. Hello, Mr. Kent.
Hello, sir.
Today, we're going to be discussing quality over quantity and how that relates to us, the instructors, on the teaching floor. Be consistent as you're teaching. Once you have made your curriculum and your lesson plan, you need to stick to them. Your students will not know their information if you're always changing how the moves are to be performed. You need to have clear, concise examples of how the moves are to be done. If possible, have photos of the moves, or even better, have a video of how you want the move to be performed. That way, you and your instructors, as well as your students, can refer back to that and everybody can be on the same page. Consistency is not just about the moves. If you're laid back in all of your teaching, in your classes, the things you require, not asking much of your students, not correcting the little things, then on testing, you're hardcore and strict and require all those things that you glossed over in your class. There's no way for your students to be able to live up to that. There's no way for your students to know what to expect on testing if you're one way in class and then a complete other way during your test. As far as consistency goes, you need to be able to start class on time and then also end class on time. If you are consistently going over and one class and then starting another class late, of course, that eats into the amount of material you can cover during that class. It sets you back. You have to skip things or do things quicker than what you need to be doing. So then that will put the students at a disadvantage. You also look unprofessional if you can't start or end a class on time. So above all else, if you can't get anything else right for the day, start the class when you're supposed to start the class and then end the class when you're supposed to end the class.
That might look different depending on your class sizes too, because I know if you have 4 people in a class, they get out of the room a lot faster than it takes 40 people to get out of the class. So if you know that you're in a bigger class and you need to allow them time to get out, yes, you need to end on time, but maybe end a minute or two early. That way you can transition between your classes in a decent amount of time and you're not ending the one class on time, but the time it takes them to leave and get the next class set up cuts into the next class's time and takes away from their training as well. So just be aware of your class sizes and how long it might take to get people in and out. And then, like you said, be consistent with that. That way everyone is being given the appropriate amount of time and training opportunity.
Yeah, if you have time in your schedule to allow a 5-minute window, a 2-minute window, although if you had 2 minutes, that means you may start and end classes on a weird time just because it's only 2 minutes. But if you had a 5-minute window in between each of your classes, yeah, that means you're there for maybe 15, 20 minutes extra in the evening, but that would allow you that in-between time to end a class, get the next class lined up, have some time to interchange and talk with them before class is actually set to start, and then you go on to start that class. And I understand that's not feasible for everybody. Totally get that. We actually don't have that either, although for a length of time we had about a 15-minute window between a couple of our classes, and that actually was really nice to be able to end the class. We had time for the next students to come in. We had an opportunity to communicate with them and be personable with them, ask them questions, and have that interpersonal interactions with our students just because we had that extra time. But again, I know that doesn't fit for everybody in their schedules.
Yeah, and another level to that too, if you have help, whether it be assistant instructors or that special team of role models we talked about, the junior instructors, while you're finishing up the class, whether it be reviewing what you went over, doing your mat chat, or just talking about things that are coming up, you can have that assistant instructor or that helper be getting the next class ready, whether it be lined up on the side of the room or just standing up and ready to line up, or if you have the space, make your lines in a different part of the room. That way when that other class leaves, all they have to do is move up and then they're in their spots or whatever. So if you have the ability and have the help, you can use that to help kind of do 2 things at once. That way you don't have to take that extra time in between the 2 or on top of the other, and they can be doing that as well because they don't need to sit there and listen to what you say, stare at you the whole time. It's nice to have them understand what's happening and listen to the conversation, but they don't need to be sitting there with the students as if they were one, soaking in every word and looking at you the whole time. So they can be kind of covering that part of it while you're doing what you're doing as well.
Yes, sir.
And that would kind of help with the overlap of time, because then, maybe instead of a 5-minute process, that cuts it down to a 2.5-minute process. Well, you save 2.5 minutes, which might not seem like a lot, but it's going to make a whole difference. Like you said, it could throw your whole night off, and it's going to accumulate. So if it's 2.5 minutes one class, another 2.5 minutes in next class, another 2.5 minutes, and you're 7.5 minutes late on your class, then you can throw everything off. So again, that's another tool or another way you can kind of move around that problem, is if you have someone else to help you.
Yes, sir. Quality versus quantity is an argument that you will have to have with yourself. As martial arts instructors, we have the opportunity to teach more or require a higher level of our students. If you choose quantity, your students will know more moves, but they may not know them as well. If you choose quality, your students may know fewer moves, but they will know them better. I chose to group this topic of consistency with quantity versus quality because whatever you choose, you need to take that choice, make that choice, and then stick to it. You can't be back and forth requiring more moves at a higher quality or lower moves or less moves at a lesser quality. Once you make the choice to be in the quality or the quantity realm, you need to stay in there, right? For that, either for that belt level or for that class level or for that entire year or curriculum or however you want to separate it out. But once you make that choice, you need to stick with it at least until there's a next changing point after that belt cycle, after that class is over, after that beginners, after they move to the intermediate level, after the intermediates move to the advanced level, whatever it is. But once you make that, you need to stick to it for as long as those students are in that testing cycle. Because if you go back and forth too many times, again, by the time your students get to their testing, they're not going to know what's expected of them. They're not going to know how to perform the moves, whether you want more moves or fewer moves, or if they need to be performing at a high level, or if they can get by with doing moves at a lower level. You need to make that choice and then stick to it. Again, you cannot be wishy-washy back and forth. When your students are testing and they perform moves at a lower quality, you have to know that that's because of the choice you made. On the other hand, if you choose quality and your students get to testing and they don't know the required information, but the few moves that they know very well, again, you need to understand that's because of the choice that you made. This can also be a both situation. You can perhaps start in the beginner's class with requiring more moves at a little bit lower output level. And then as your students progress through the ranks and get to the higher ranks in the advanced classes and the black belt classes, you require fewer moves, but a much higher quality. And so you may start at one level, and then as you go through, there is a gradual shift from quantity over to quality by the time they get into the advanced and the black belt ranks. Now, this could be across your entire classes, all of your classes. So again, starting at beginners and then ending in the black belt classes, or this can be from the beginning of the beginner's class to the end of the beginner's class. And then again at the beginning of the intermediate class, and then the end of the intermediate class, and so on as you go. Or you can even break it down more within your testing cycle. The beginning of the testing cycle is quantity, and then by the time the students test over the material, that quantity shifts over to quality. And then the testing cycle is over, it starts over. You require a lot of moves, or you teach them rather quickly, and then as you progress through that belt level, they shift over to quality because they already know the moves, and so they can use that time in class instead of learning more moves, the moves that they already knew, the moves they already know because you taught them at a rather quick pace because you prioritized quantity in the beginning. Then by the time they test, because they already learned the moves within a handful of weeks, they can start to perfect and improve upon those moves as they get to belt testing. Then by the time they're testing, they know those moves that they need to know for that level at a high quality.
This works really well for our curriculum, the way we have our classes set up and our lesson plans. And we talked about it several times, but this is something you have to do for yourself to find out the way you want things to be structured and find out the way your program works best. But the way we work our program, as it's designed, is to be a long-term program. So meaning we, from the time you get your white belt until you get your black belt, it's practically 4 years. And so, as you said at the beginning, I'm more focused on quantity in the sense that I would like you to be able to know a lot of moves, and then I take that time over those 4 years as you progress to different levels and different classes, and we work more on the quality. So I'm not saying that I'm going to throw 50 moves at you and I don't care what they look like. I still want them to be good, but I'm not as concerned with making sure every single move is super great before we move to the next one. I'll give you a handful of them. We'll work on them, maybe to like 60 or 70%. And then I know in my head, I have so many years that we can work on upping or improving the quality of it. So like you said, you start in the beginner's class focusing on quantity. And then the next class, you kind of do a 50-50 of the quantity and the quality. We're working on the moves I already know and then doing the new moves. And then the next class, you're working more, 75% quality, 25% quantity. And by the time they reach that black belt level, it's almost 100% quality of those moves they've already done. And of course, they're learning more moves after that. But at that point in time, they know how they learn. They know how to learn from us. We've developed a relationship with them. Like, we've had so much time to hone in that learning process with each person. That's a lot easier to focus on the quality over the quantity. So as much as you need to be consistent with the way that the things you're prioritizing, it can look different for each level, like you said. So not that it's not inconsistent to have beginners focus on quality and then intermediate focus on both, and advanced class focus on quality, because you're consistent at each level, even though the consistency isn't consistent across all of the levels, if that makes sense. So again, it's up to you to kind of figure out where your focus should be and what you want at each level. And then, as you said, be consistent each level with those focuses. And then, it might take you a while to figure out the best balance of that. And that brings up another good point where we talk about a lot of things. And in most things, there is a balance. And more often than not, it's not black and white. It's not one or the other. So being able to feel that out and work on that, I think, is largely beneficial, not only to you when you're teaching and working on your curriculum, but also to the student, because then they know what to expect. They know what's expected of them, and we're setting them up for success in that long-term training program or cycle.
Yeah, and you can kind of almost experiment with this as well. So we just went through a Christmas break, and for Christmas break, the way our school works is we have belt testing kind of at the end of November. We have about 6 classes or so in December. Then we leave for 2 weeks for Christmas, and then for New Year's. Then when we come back, frequently it's has been as if the students, they completely forget that karate exists, and then they come back. Of course, this is mainly the kids. They come back, and we almost have to redo those 6 classes that we had prior to the break. And we've went through a number of years of this cycle. Okay, we've tried different things throughout to adjust and to correct and to try to help fix this situation. This year we did 2 things that were a little bit different. Number one, we have the practice cards. Previously, last year, we had a practice card just for one belt level as like a pilot program. Now all of our levels have the practice cards. And I can tell you the number of students that did their practice cards over break, I kind of felt like my evil mastermind plan was falling into place, because I got so many emails from the students that had been doing their practice card. So just in case you don't know what practice card is, we did almost a whole episode on practice, but they get emailed individually. Each student gets emailed a survey, and on that survey it says, practice your hand technique, this hand technique 5 times on the right side of your body, check the box. practice this hand technique 5 times on the left side of your body, check the box, hit the submit button, and then those emails actually go directly to me for this school, and then in our other school, they go directly to Master Kent. So we, the instructors, get to see and have that feedback of who actually has been putting in the time at home to do their practice. So again, all that being said, and there's a number of them that they get on a drip type basis about once a week, right up until pretty close till belt testing. The number of practice cards that I got over Christmas break was extraordinary. I was happily surprised with the number of people that did that. Again, frequently over Christmas break, you can say go home, practice. But sometimes, like we talked about in the other episode, if you don't give those students direct practice this many times on this side of your body, they don't necessarily know what to practice. They may practice something that is quote unquote fun for them, but not actually useful for them to need to know in class. They'll practice something they know already super great because they know it's super great. It takes a handful of minutes. Okay, great, I practice. Woo! They come back, did you practice? Yes, sir. And you have them do something, oh, well, I didn't practice that. I didn't know I needed it. Well, practice cards help with that tremendously. That was step number 1. Step number 2 is during those 6 classes, we prioritized quantity. So during those 6 classes before Christmas break, we pretty well, for nearly all of our belts, taught everything they need to know during those 6 classes. Generally, we take about 8 or 10 classes to teach all of the information for their belt cycle. We condensed that just a little bit and taught it all within 6 classes. So inside of those 6 classes, they got all their hand techniques, they got all their foot techniques, they got their new form, everything they need to know, we condensed enough that we could fit that into 6 classes. Then as we were going through those classes, of course, they had to progress from old information into their new information, and they had a few times to practice that new information. Then we would move on to the next old information. They'd learn and practice their new information and so on. So by the time they left for Christmas break, they had a decent amount of practice on all of their information. Then we left 2 weeks. That's like skipping 8 classes in a row, at least the way our school operates. We came back, and I can say my students, the students that I have, the groups that I have, were tremendous, well beyond previous years of taking these 2 weeks off. We've done Christmas break every year that we've been in business, but again, frequently you come back and it's like, karate? Yeah, I don't remember any of that. You asked them to do it, boom, they were right on it, they could do it, and it wasn't quite exactly what it looked like before break, but it was close enough that it seemed like, to at least to me, that they actually practice. And how are your students, sir?
Good, sir. Good.
Yeah. And I don't know why it's taken this long to think to do that, to prioritize quantity in the beginning of the testing cycle, specifically when we have that break built into the lesson plan. We have the 2 weeks off. So you do this, and this, boom, gone for 2 weeks. You come back and you have to try to pick up the pieces as if they never left, but really those first week or even 2 is rebuilding those classes that you did before break. And so quantity over quality is something that you can play with. Now, when I say play with, you can't switch in the middle of a testing cycle. So the students that are, per se, let's say yellow belts for right now, I can't throw a handful of moves at them. Let's say I give them 5 moves and I want them to know those super good. And then midway through the curriculum, I teach them 15 more moves and I need them to know those also. So I can't do that. I need to play within testing cycles, play within belt levels. So at the beginning of the testing cycle, try to draw out the move set. Drawing out the move set means that you require quality moves. So you teach this little bit of information and you want the students to know it really good. Then after they can do that, then you move to the next one and you want them to do that really good. And what that means is by the time they test, they might have just recently done the last couple of moves, but because you required them to do it at such a high level over the whole testing cycle, the chances of them knowing those moves well are going to be high. Now, on the flip side of that, you can give them, like what we did for this testing cycle, a bunch of moves, all of the moves they need to know within 2 weeks, a week and a half or so. Then over that testing cycle, you can start to pick apart and tweak and refine those moves so that by the time they go to testing, they've got lots and lots and lots of coverage over those, lots of reps on those moves. And as they go through those reps, you can tweak and change and improve those things. It's two sides to the same coin. The end result is you want your students to look good, know their stuff, and perform well on testing, and perhaps if they get grabbed or have to do this stuff in a real life situation that they need to save or protect themselves. Again, two sides to the same coin. Either you draw it out and require them to do it at a high level throughout the whole thing, or you give them a whole bunch, and then as that whole bunch in a little bit of time, then as that time goes, you critique and improve and change and morph that grouping moves into a high level by the time they test over them. The key to this, I think, really lies in how many moves you require for each belt testing. And we'll, in a future episode, we'll go into a whole episode or maybe a handful of episodes on testing and how your curriculum should work and your lesson plans and all that. But for right now, as it relates to quality versus quantity, that's my 2 cents. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, sir. I guess moving on, it's all related, being quantity versus quality and consistency and whatnot. But keep in mind that anytime you do choose to prioritize the quantity over the quality, you are allowing room for bad habits to form and room for bad habits to be practiced. And that could mean that down the road, you'll have to go back and do some work to correct those bad habits. So another downside to throwing lots of moves at your students is that they won't be able to do them as well. They'll be doing them poorly, performing them at a lower level, which means later they'll have to go back and kind of work on those things and fix those things and break those bad habits that you allowed to form. So again, it is a balance between the two of them. It can go too much on either side, but specifically when it's quantity over quality, you may be allowing those bad things to happen because you're not paying as much attention or being as strict on the performance of the moves. And so that's something you want to avoid anytime you are prioritizing the quantity.
Yeah, and speaking on being strict with the moves, that's where tough love comes into play. Tough love needs to be our default mode. With tough love, we, as we've kind of talked about before in our correction episodes, we're going to be a little bit of a rehash of that. But with tough love, you need to be firm but fair. If you're not correcting the mistakes, or you're treating your students like they can only do things perfectly, as we talked about, perfectly is not something that humans can do very well. You're not benefiting them. If you're not correcting the mistakes, if you're not saying, hey, you need to fix this. Now, of course, you do it in a loving, caring way, again, firm but fair. You're not helping your students. You're not helping your students by shying away from that correction or from fixing those mistakes that they might or that that they're making. Now, of course, with this, you need to prioritize the highest value correction that you can do, meaning basically if they're doing 18 things wrong, what is the one of those 18 things, or maybe the two of those 18 things, that's going to have the most overarching effect? Give them those corrections. Then, once they've corrected those things, of course, praise them for correcting those. Hey, awesome job. Your stance now looks awesome. Very good. And then after they practice that for a little bit, then you move on to the next highest overreaching correction, and then you make that correction. Again, don't be afraid to correct your students. If you're not correcting them, if you're not saying, hey, you fix this or change this or tweak this or whatever it is, then your students aren't going to grow. They're not going to know their moves. You're setting them up for failure in numerous other ways. You have to be there to say, hey, listen, this needs to be done like this. And then let them practice it. Show them how you want it to be done, and then have them do that. Once they've made that correction, then you move into the next one, and so on. But don't think that you're helping your students by not correcting them. That is, again, setting them up for failure in numerous other ways in your program, but also, in the real world, because everybody needs to know how to handle some sort of rejection or some sort of critique. And if you're not allowing the students to learn that in a loving, caring fashion here in your school, then perhaps when they get into the quote unquote real world and somebody smashes a hammer on them, then they're not going to be set up for that. They don't know how to deal with that. And you could have helped them through that by giving them that loving, caring correction, because you want to see your students perform well. You need to have that in a firm but fair way. You want to be fair to everybody. And again, don't shy away from correcting them. Tough love. Make that your default in your classes.
Keep in mind, we're not saying to smash your students either. This isn't a permission to be a jerk to everyone. As you mentioned, we talked a lot about this in our correction episode previously, and there's probably a lot left unsaid that we can still talk about. But, there is a good way to correct your students. There is a constructive way to correct your students. And tough love it's still love. So, again, we're not saying that you need to completely tear down your students and destroy them and stomp on them and say that, oh, well, I'm doing this because it's good for you, or I'm doing this because it's going to help you, whatever. There is a balance and a correct way, a beneficial way to do that. So, like we said, maybe take a listen back to the correction episode, and there's plenty more that we could say about it. We could have more conversation about it, but this is not a free license to destroy your students, because they are a reflection of your teaching. So if something is going wrong, also, like we say often, it's your responsibility. It's your fault. So you need to be able to deal with that in the appropriate manner that is both beneficial for the student, but then also helps you to improve the way you're teaching or the way things are structured for you.
Yes, sir. So today we've been talking about quality over quantity. And again, this is an argument you have to have with yourself, and we've discussed a numerous different ways of how you can interject this into your classes or into your belt cycles or into your entire program, and how to implement this. If you haven't had this talk with yourself, think about this. Think about how you require your students to know their moves. Are you giving them too much and then asking too much for them? Are you giving them too few, and then when they get bored in class or they show up to testing and they know those few moves really good, but they don't know everything they need to know, what can you do about that? How can you correct that situation, not for just those handful of students, but across your entire student body? Quality over quantity. Do you have anything else to answer?
Yeah, I was just thinking, there's been several conversations that you and I have had where I've come to you because I'm just having a lot of trouble doing some moves or a lot of trouble getting everyone to understand what's going on. And after discussing it with you, it boils down to that quality over quantity. And in those moments, I was trying to prioritize quality over the quantity, in the sense that I was trying to make sure whatever they were doing was really good that first time they did it, rather than make sure that they were learning everything they needed to learn. And just having those conversations with you, it's important to take a step back and get a good perspective, and maybe even ask other instructors that are with you or other instructors that have been there or know what's going on, and just try to break down the situation. Because like I said, I was so focused on getting everything really good before we moved to the next thing, when I was forgetting the fact that they have another 2 months to work on this. So I can show them now, maybe it's a lower level, but over that time, I can improve the quality as we get there. So again, just pulling your team into it and making sure that you have a good perspective, whether it be you taking a step back and observing everything from farther away, or asking somebody else and just finding what works best in that scenario. But try to do everything you can not to feel stuck, because that's how I felt. Was like, I don't know what I can do to get away from this or make sure they understand better. I don't know what's going on. But maybe that's an issue that you're running into, and this could be a different way to look at it. Maybe prioritize the quantity over the quality, or find that good balance and mix of things. So I just wanted to tie it into the fact that this is something that we all can work on. We're not saying that you and I have it perfected either, because I would argue, and you might disagree, but you're much better at doing quantity, and I think I'm better at doing quality, at least in the moment. And it is just a balance that we can work together on and also work on for ourselves.
Yeah, I would agree. And if you, the listeners or the viewers, have anything to add, or you want to reach out and tell us how you interact with quality over quantity, or vice versa in your school, we'd love to have you dive into the interwebs. And of course, you can reach us on Instagram and Twitter and Reddit and Facebook and YouTube and Spotify, all those different places. Of course, you can find us at MA Teaching Tactics, MA for martial arts, again, Teaching Tactics. And
dang, you stole my line.
Do you want to do it until next time?
Yes, sir. Until next time, I'm Chris Kent.
And I'm Chris Bean.